Good morning, Apex University. I hope you're all ready for a great weekend. My name is Dan and I'll be your coach for today. Now we're starting off this vault review right by looking at a player called Cute Fluffy Cats. I'll refer to you as Fluffy from now on. Now something else we have in common aside from our love for cats is something I'd like to call chronic shift syndrome. Now what chronic shift syndrome is something very common amongst experienced players once they go into a more casual game without competitive matchmaking such as Call of Duty or OBR, which is they tend to be able to beat most opponents by just their aim, intuition and game sense alone, and therefore they like to just grab a weapon, hold shift, hold W, get in there and get some kills. This is a great way to beat your kill records. It's a great way to have a high average amount of kills. You won't win as many because you'll occasionally be punished for it. But there is a problem. Apex Legends doesn't have solos yet. And right now we only have squads, which changes the dynamic quite a bit and makes an aggressive playstyle a bit different to execute. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about area control, and I want to use this VOD as an example to teach you how to get more value out of your aggressive plays, but also how to counter aggressive plays more effectively. So the way I want to teach you area control is by looking at the start of a fight like right here. You grabbed the weapon, you got yourself an armor and you decided to rotate into Skull Town quickly for some kills. However, before you actually got there, your team pinged enemies in Thunderdome and so you turned back. We saw an enemy move from right to left across the screen and your team is pinging on the right side. So if we are to divide this map right now into different sections, I would say the right side here behind cover is what I would call enemy territory. It is dangerous, you have very little intel, and if you go down there you are probably out of reach for your teammates to help you, and it is quite easy to thirst you. On the left side we've got safer, friendly territory where your teammates are ready to back you up, and if you go down behind cover they'll probably be able to get you, or at the very least keep enemies off you for a while while trying to find a way to get you up or win the fight. In the middle we've got what I would call neutral territory. You have to cross this to get to the opponents, there is very little cover, nobody's contesting it right now, but going into it would put you directly in the crossfires of the enemy team for either your team or theirs. In general, something I want you to remember is that it is risky to switch from one of these terrains to the next unless you have cover to do so. Whenever you move from friendly territory into neutral or from neutral into enemy territory, I want you to expect to take a fair amount of poke damage. The reason it's important to notice is because that's how you realize how to counter aggressive players. Wait for them to switch zones and punish their positioning. So something I talked about before is intuition, and that is using all of this knowledge without actually consciously thinking about it. This is how we get away with these aggressive plays, because we have enough experience that even though we're not actively thinking about all of this strategy, a lot of it is in our decision making already naturally. And so what we're going to see in a second here, if we look at your movement across the map, is that you quite automatically take high ground within friendly territory, you rotate through it behind cover where you're safe, you're isolating opponents, so you're using all of this quite effectively. Something I do want to point out in this fight is how thermite grenades work. As some of you might not know, thermite grenades apply a damage over time that deals 25 damage in total. So far you probably know this. However, every time that you are still within the range of the thermite grenade, another damage tick is applied to you and they overlap. So now you're taking 50 damage over time. Because you decide to exit the thermite through its area here, you're taking 2 damage ticks where you really only should have taken 1. And right here you decide to traverse out through the open, you use your smoke a bit too late. Had you done that more proactively, you wouldn't have had to take shield damage here, wouldn't have had to use a battery. Small mistake. The last thing I want to point out here, which you do quite right, but you definitely need to improve, is that you instantly, after you heal, seem to be aware of this power position. I see you aiming up at it, I see you trying to look for cover, and I see you trying to look for a way to get around or up it. Something you are quite careful with is climbing on top of it, because if somebody's already holding a power position up there, you are allowing them to deal a lot of damage to you, so far that's very good. You make the right decision of deciding to go back and rotate via the bottom in this location. I think that that's what I would have done as well. However, you do so way too slowly and a better opponent would have punished you. Now, one last thing I do want to point out right here as you get into a battle with this last opponent is that you decide to strafe very correctly so and faster than your enemy, and you have some cover on your left which you very rightfully so chose to exit out. However, you're not actually using the cover, so I would like to see you strafe a little bit closer to cover while you're both using automatic weapons to gain that little bit extra advantage here. You're doing it automatically, but you're not quite doing it right. moving on. As we look at the rest of your mod after this fight, we see your pathing is quite good. Even when looting, you take good cover, you are somewhat aware of your surroundings, and as soon as you hear some gunshots, you go for the next fight. So let's apply the same logic again and see how we can use area control to our advantage here. You hear some gunshots and you see the ship to your right. You approach via high ground, so far very good, and you're on a fairly defendable position. Now, as soon as you see some opponents here, you notice that they are fighting and you see a total of 2 opponents. The first thing to think about is that this is not a 1v2 situation, this is a 1v1v1. Why does this matter? The reason this matters is because the potential amount of opponents within this fight that are already engaged or already looking at you that you don't know about isn't 1, but is 4, and this makes a huge difference in how much space you have to make aggressive plays. Now if we look at this position and use the same logic as before to divide the terrain into safe and dangerous territories, as well as some neutral ones, I would like you to think for now for a second about which territory would be which, and I'll give you a hint and say that the line dividing the territories is this little high ground that you are on, as well as potentially some more area off to the right. Now, I think a lot of you would have said that the area that you are on, because your teammates are behind you, is safe and it is defendable, and the area in front of you is enemy territory. Sadly, this is wrong. Your teammates aren't close enough to you. There is a high ground position really close to you on the supply ship. You have no clue what's to your left and right. You don't have sight on 4 of your opponents, and your teammates aren't engaged yet, meaning they aren't able to provide the front line pressure to give you space to work with. So the area you are on now, although it might feel quite safe, isn't actually friendly territory, it's neutral. You're already in the neutral territory pushing up to the enemy. Once you realize this, I'm sure you'll notice that pushing the advantage on 1 enemy when there are still 5 others, potentially, is a bad call. You deal some good amount of damage to the Pathfinder here, but you instantly decide to push in and push your advantage when there's still a lot of enemies you don't know about. You lose the kill to the Wraith, which makes sense, and the Wraith hasn't even taken a lot of damage yet. You have an aggressive double SMG build, and luckily you do have some cover to work around, so you get the kill on the Wraith here, but overall you're not very safe yet. Rather than pushing on the damage you had done to the Pathfinder, I would have liked to see you hold that position, and you could have probably gotten the kill yourself, because you would have actually had a better angle. As well as you would have been able to do some damage to the Wraith before engaging on her, and you would have potentially found out about the other 4 opponents. Right now your trigger is you'll push on any advantage. In this situation, because there were too many unknowns, I would have liked to see you wait not for your teammates to be close to you, but for when your teammates actually start shooting the opponents. Once you have either that safety of your teammates being there and creating like this safe haven for you to back off to, or once you have the information you need to actually outplay all of your opponents, that's when I would like to see you go in. Preferably knowing whether or not they are on the supply ship with long range weapons. Now you end up going in without much information, but one of the enemies luckily is very low, so you get a great knock on them from far away. Of course, instantly you tunnel vision because you have an advantage to push, you do a fair amount of damage, you fall for a bamboozle, and I want to pause right there before we actually see what happens. I'm sure, because you seem like a competent player, that as soon as you shot this bamboozle, you knew you fucked up. You knew you were probably in a lot of trouble here, because you're out in the open and the only cover is controlled by your enemy, who we are about to find out has a peacekeeper worst case scenario for you. As soon as you shoot your bamboozle, I need you to shift your mindset from dealing damage to surviving. Right now what you need to do is make sure you end up on your right side of this cover, and preferably within your own smoke, so that if you go down here you don't have to die and your teammates can win the fight because of the incredible amount of damage you've done. If you don't do that and your teammates lose this fight, you can't be mad at them for losing a 2v1 because you didn't set it up right. You're the better player here, so I want you to realize giving your teammates these opportunities, you'll end up with more kills anyway because you're good enough. Don't be aggressive for kills, be smart for kills. Now luckily your teammates clean this up, you end up with a fair amount of kills, and we move on to the next fight. So in the next fight it's a bit different because it's not actually a team fight such as these ones are. However, you run into Skull Town and you end up running into an isolated opponent that isn't expecting you. You hold your shot for a second until they're out of cover, and you kill them quite quickly. So far very good. The only small thing I would like to comment here, which again has to do with you not valuing scouting for information enough, is that you instantly decide to thirst this enemy before you know anything about his teammates. You know that he has at least one teammate, unless he has self-res, because he doesn't instantly die. Alright, what I would have liked to see you do is leave this guy alive for a split second to see in which direction he crawls and whether teammates show up, because that could lead to more kills for you. In general, the direction your enemies crawl to when they are down, if it isn't out of zone or the nearest cover, is where their teammates are. Do keep in mind if you do this to instantly change your positioning, because they'll be pinging where they last saw you and where they expect you to be, and you can actually use that by leaving this enemy alive to outplay your opponents more easily by thinking of where he's going to ping you, breaking line of sight, making sure you're far enough away that he can't hear you, and then getting an unexpected angle on the opponent that is going to try to help this guy out. Well, you decide to push around here. Your team is quite close to you, there's an enemy on you, but you deal with him quite well, and now you need to heal. Let's see how you handle this. And then I want to point out something right here. You're healing after this fight, but you're in a low ground position. I already see you crouching behind a rock, and this is something else where I can see your intuition kicking in. This is clearly not a very safe situation for you to heal right after a fight. Again, I would like to see you go back behind cover here, handle this a little bit smarter in case your team gets engaged upon that, or just put a smoke on your team right here in front of you. That would help as well. Now a smoke might give away your position, but you've made so much noise from this gunfight anyway that at this point it doesn't really matter. And as soon as this fight starts, I want to point something out that perhaps might sound a little bit insulting, but it is important to remind ourselves of the mistakes we've made when we haven't been punished for them, so that we don't get into the trap of building bad habits or toxic behavior. And what I want to point out in this fight is that you start at a very bad position. Now, you instantly use your ultimate and your smoke to try and compensate for it, and you decide to heal, again in a terrible spot. But the reason I wanted to point this out is because you end up getting most of the damage and the kills in this fight, and from this perspective it kind of looks like you carried the fight. And that's what most of this game looks like, obviously, because you're a better player than these people, let's be honest. But in this fight, in this position, I hope that when you look back at it, you realize that the only reason you won this fight is because of the positioning of your teammates. The fact that they didn't back off, they had some giant balls, and they stood their ground when you were on low ground healing, were able to hold off these opponents and force them into a bad position when they engaged from an incredible position with more information from you, is the only reason you were able to make the play that you end up making here. Even if your teammates are not able to output a lot of damage, or even if they aren't able to get the same amount of kills as you do, it is still very important to realize the incredible value that they bring to a team fight. It is a team fight after all. And lastly, let's look at the final team fight here. Now, you didn't spot or hear an enemy here, but your teammate did, so you seem to be looking around for it. And right here, something I want to talk about is your, well, not talk about, I want to acknowledge it. I don't actually want to talk about it. It's your decision to drop down, because the way I've looked at this gameplay so far, my judgment of your skill level is that this is just a mistake. You weren't thinking about it. There was no reason, nothing prompted dropping down here. You're putting yourself in a bad position. You're being loud. You have your weapon out slow. You're clearly looking for an opponent, but this, I'm sure you realize this wasn't the right way to do it. You end up putting yourself in a terrible position because of it. Something I do want to point out is that after you fell down, instead of instantly regaining high grounds once you learned about the position of your opponents, is that you instantly went for them on low ground. You end up using a truck for cover, which in this position, I'm sure you realize, effectively acts as half cover, not full cover. So this is not ideal. They have high ground over you, and you end up putting yourself in a tough spot. Now your teammates luckily are still on high ground, providing pressure for you to even be able to get off a shield cell here, because the enemy should have punished you for this mistake. So you end up still outputting a good amount of damage, but sooner or later you're going to get punished for the position that you're in, which leads your team to try and fight a Kraber and a team on a defendable high ground alone, and obviously they lose. So overall, if I had to summarize your gameplay, Fluffy, I would say you're definitely a good player. You have the right instincts, and I can actually see in the way you play that you have the experience to frag out, to get some high kill games and to do this right, but not using your aggression properly is what's getting you killed. What I would like to see is to transform your aggression from just holding Shift and W to what I call staggered aggression. Staggered aggression means learning to identify the exact moments in a fight that you should push aggressively and get all the kills, and learning to identify how to set up fights in such a way that you can not only get all the kills but also get them fairly safely, so that afterwards you can rotate towards the next fight as fast as possible. Keep in mind not taking a lot of damage and not being too afraid of third parties, because if your setup is what allows you the follow up for higher kill games. It can feel a little counterintuitive, but sometimes slowing down a little bit is what we need. With that said, I hope this helped. I hope you all have a great day. Peace.